On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a massive strike on Iran. Within hours, the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was dead, killed inside a fortified bunker beneath Tehran by a bomb built to punch through concrete and rock. What was meant to be a clean surgical operation became something else entirely. Burning refineries across the Persian Gulf, hundreds of drones in the Strait of Hormuz, ballistic missiles raining down on American bases in Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan. Watch the footage and it looks like an eternal war. Shia against the West. The axis of evil against the fortress of democracy. But here's the thing almost nobody tells you. Less than 50 years ago, Iran and Israel were quiet allies. Tehran's real enemy wasn't the Jewish state, and it wasn't the religion of its neighbors. It was the British and American oil machine that spent decades pumping more out of the country than it ever left behind. So how did we get here? How did a nation go from being an American puppet to a state powerful enough to drag the entire Middle East into crisis single-handedly? To answer that, we have to go back to a January morning in 1979, when an old man in a black turban walked down the steps of an Air France jet in Tehran. The CIA didn't take him seriously, neither did Paris. Within months, he ruled a country of 40 million people. This is the story of how the West may have built, with its own hands, the exact Iran it feared most. Stick with me to the end, because the pattern you're about to see doesn't just explain Iran. It's the same pattern behind half the legends of the modern world, and I'll show you where it leads. Part 1. Who are the Iranians? To understand why Iran reacts so violently to outside pressure, you have to understand who Iranians actually are. Iran is one of the oldest continuous civilizations on Earth. A country the size of all of Western Europe, sitting at the crossroads of every road that matters. Europe to India, Russia to the warm seas, the Mediterranean to Central Asia. That location made Iran a permanent arena for other people's ambitions. When London was still a swamp and Moscow didn't yet exist, the Persian Empire of the Achaemenids stretched from Egypt to India, the largest state the ancient world had ever seen. Its founder, Cyrus the Great, left behind a clay cylinder ordering the release of captives and respect for conquered people's beliefs. A copy of it sits in the UN headquarters in New York today. Iranians don't remember this as museum history. They remember it as proof. We are a great civilization, and we deserve respect. Then, in the 7th century, everything flipped. Arab armies, energized by a new religion, Islam, poured out of Arabia and destroyed the Persian Sasanian Empire completely. For Persians, it was a catastrophe. Imagine Rome being wiped out in a single generation by people nobody had taken seriously the day before. The Persians accepted Islam, but they did not dissolve. They kept their language, Farsi. They kept their poetry. And they buried a feeling deep in their cultural memory that would smolder for centuries. We were a great empire, and yesterday's nomads conquered us. Part 2. The Shia split. Right after the Prophet Muhammad died, Islam split, and that split still draws the political map of the Middle East today. The question seemed simple. Who should succeed the Prophet? His close companion or his blood relative? The majority, who became the Sunnis, chose the companion, Abu Bakr. A minority insisted power belonged to Ali, the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, and his descendants. They were called Shiat Ali, the party of Ali, the Shia. Over time, this became a deep theological divide, and the Shia carry one powerful idea above all others: martyrdom and resistance. Their great saint, Imam Hussein, was killed by a Sunni caliph at the Battle of Karbala in 680. Every year, millions of Shia mourn his death during Ashura. The lesson buried in that ritual: a true believer rises against unjust power, even if defeat is certain. Hold on to that idea. It comes back at the very end of this story. In the 16th century, the Safavid dynasty made Shiism Iran's state religion, partly for faith, but mostly for politics. Choosing Shiism drew a hard line. We are not Arabs. We are not Ottomans. We have our own path. Shiism became a form of national identity, the religious language Iran used to tell the world. We are different. That fusion, Shiism plus Iranian nationalism, is the key to everything that follows. Part 3. The allergy to outsiders. Fast forward to the 19th century, and you find the root of Iran's almost genetic allergy to foreign interference. Iran was ruled by the weak, corrupt Qajar dynasty. To the north loomed the Russian Empire, pushing toward the Caucasus and the warm seas. To the south, Britain, which didn't want Iran's land, only a buffer to protect its real treasure, India. 2 Russo-Persian wars ended in disaster. By the 1828 Treaty of Turkmenchay, Iran lost the entire Caucasus, modern Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and was forbidden from keeping a navy on the Caspian. A former world empire lost the right to defend its own shores. This was the great game. Russia and Britain competing over Central Asia, with Iran as the chessboard, not a player. Meanwhile, the Qajar Shahs toured Europe, fell in love with its luxury, and paid for it by selling off their country's sovereignty, handing foreigners concessions on resources, trade, infrastructure, modernizing the facade while selling the foundation. That theme repeats again and again in Iranian history. Then came tobacco. In 1890, the Shah handed a British major a total monopoly on tobacco, production, sale, export. In Persia, everyone smoked. A hookah sat in every home. Giving that to a foreigner was like giving a stranger the right to decide who could drink tea in Russia. And here, for the first time, the Shia clergy stepped in as a political force. A leading cleric issued a fatwa. While the British concession stands, using tobacco is a sin. The effect was instant. The bazaars closed. The country simply stopped smoking. The Shah backed down. For the first time, the formula, religious authority plus popular rage, defeated both the Shah and foreign capital at once. 90 years later, that exact formula would return, with infinitely higher stakes. Part 4. Oil and the British Grip. In 1901, a British businessman named William Knox Darcy got a concession to drill for oil, on terms wildly in his favor. Nearly three-quarters of the country, a 60-year term, and Iran getting a mere 16% of net profit that the company itself defined. Iranians never saw the books. For 7 years, Darcy found nothing. Then, in May 1908, just as London telegraphed orders to stop drilling, oil erupted from the desert at Masjid Soliman, the first major oil strike in the entire Middle East. A few days' delay in a telegram decided the fate of a nation. Soon, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company was born, the company that eventually became BP. By 1914, Winston Churchill converted the Royal Navy from coal to oil and bought 51% of the company for the British state. The Crown was no longer a customer. It was the co-owner of Iran's underground. The country had been turned into a foreign empire's gas station. Then came the forgotten tragedy. During World War I, foreign armies, British, Russian, Ottoman, marched across neutral Iran and seized its food. From 1917 to 1919, famine killed somewhere between several 100,000 and 2 million people. Iranian historians sometimes call it a forgotten genocide. A country that didn't even fight in the war lost a huge share of its population because foreign armies took its grain. Part 5. The Pahlavis and the coup. Out of that chaos rose Reza Khan, a tough cavalry officer. In 1921, he seized power. By 1925, he founded a new dynasty, the Pahlavis. He built roads and railways, opened secular schools, and in 1935 officially changed the country's name from Persia to Iran, land of the Aryans. A bold statement of sovereignty. But on oil, his hands were tied. Britain still controlled the drilling, the refining, the export. When Reza Shah drifted toward Germany before World War II, looking for a third power to balance Russia and Britain, the Allies invaded. Soviet troops from the north, British from the south. He was forced to abdicate and shipped into exile, where he died. His 22-year-old son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was placed on the throne. Then came the moment that poisoned everything. By the early 1950s, Iran had a prime minister named Mohammad Mosaddegh, a European-educated liberal nationalist with one iron conviction. Iranian oil should belong to Iran. He nationalized the oil industry and threw Anglo-Iranian out of the country. For millions of Iranians, it was a moment of overwhelming pride. For the first time in decades, their country said no. And the world listened. But saying no was expensive. Britain blockaded Iranian oil. The economy buckled. And in 1953, the CIA and MI6 launched Operation Ajax. Paid mobs flooded the streets. Tanks surrounded Mossadegh's home. He was arrested. The young Shah, who had fled in a panic to Rome, returned to take a victory parade. Here's the bitter irony. Mosaddegh was doing exactly what America claimed to value, defending his nation's sovereignty democratically. But when a foreign country's sovereignty collided with American interests, sovereignty lost. The reward? Control of Iran's oil passed to an international consortium, and American companies who'd had nothing before now got a major share. The coup paid for itself in oil. This is the original sin. Every Iranian knows this story, and it's why, for the regime that came later, the West will always betray us isn't paranoia, it's living memory. Part 6. The rise of Khomeini. The Shah, now propped up by Washington and London, built a regime where modernization and repression marched together. The CIA helped create his secret police, Savak. He launched the White Revolution, land reform, women's rights, literacy drives. Girls from the provinces went to school for the first time, but dissent could cost you your freedom, or your life. The reforms also tore up the old world. Peasants flooded into city slums. The clergy lost its land and economic base. Millions were ripped out of their old lives without finding a place in the new one, and their anger soon found a voice. That voice was Ruhollah Khomeini, a senior cleric who, in 1963, openly called the Shah a puppet of America and Israel. He was arrested, then exiled. The Shah assumed the old man would be forgotten. The opposite happened. Over 14 years in exile, Khomeini rewrote the foundations of Shia political thought. Traditionally, Shia clergy stayed out of governing. They taught and judged, but rule was worldly and corrupting. Khomeini argued the reverse. In his doctrine of velayat-e-faqih, guardianship of the jurist, he claimed that until the hidden imam returns, someone must rule in his name. Not the Shah, not parliament, but the supreme religious scholar. Many senior clerics saw this as a radical, almost heretical invention. But Khomeini wasn't talking to them. He was talking to millions of ordinary believers, for whom the mullah in the mosque was already the highest authority in their lives. Then he reached for Shi'ism's most powerful emotional weapon, the cult of martyrdom. He mapped Karbala onto the present. The Shah is the tyrant. The protesters are the righteous. America is the empire behind the tyrant. To march into the bullets is a sacred duty. To die is not defeat. It is the highest honor. The more people the regime killed, the more people came out. The machine of repression was working against itself. Part 7. The secret alliance with Israel. Here's the part of the story that gets erased. In those same years, the Shah's Iran and Israel were quiet partners. The logic was simple. Iran wasn't Arab. Israel wasn't Arab. Their Arab neighbors, Egypt, Iraq, Syria, were hostile to both. So Tehran and Tel Aviv shared an interest. Don't let the Arab states grow strong enough to dictate to the whole region. Israel called it the alliance of the periphery. Mossad and Savak traded intelligence. Israeli specialists worked inside Iran. It wasn't friendship. It was cold calculation between two regimes who found each other useful. But for our story, the point is this. In 1979, there was no eternal hatred between Iran and Israel. That hatred would be invented, deliberately, politically, ideologically. Part 8. The Revolution. The Shah's last mistake was forcing Khomeini out of Iraq. The old man landed in Paris, at the center of the world's media. From a small house in the suburbs, he gave interviews to global outlets while cassette tapes of his sermons flooded Iran's mosques and bazaars. The CIA was convinced, right to the end, that religious leaders never make revolutions. They were wrong in a way great powers are rarely wrong. By January 1979, the strikes had killed oil exports, the army wouldn't fire on its own people, and the Shah fled, never to return. On February 1st, Khomeini's Air France jet touched down in Tehran. The man the Shah had thrown out 16 years earlier came back as the victor. A new constitution enshrined velayat-e-faqih. Above the president and parliament sat the supreme leader, the Rahbar, higher than any elected office. Khomeini became the first. One of his first acts, a total break with Israel. The embassy was handed to the Palestine Liberation Organization. The word Israel vanished from official language, replaced by the Zionist regime. Khomeini coined the formula, Israel is the little Satan. America is the great Satan. But strip away the slogans and ask the hard question. What did Khomeini actually offer Iran, beyond Islam and a list of enemies? Mosaddegh had offered a concrete program, nationalized oil, economic sovereignty, constitutional democracy. Khomeini offered velayat-e-faqih and sacred struggle. The oil money now flowed to a growing apparatus, the Revolutionary Guard, the religious foundations, the networks loyal to the Rahbar. For the ordinary Iranian who marched for justice, little changed. Wealth moved from one elite to another. Maybe that's exactly why the regime needed an external enemy so badly, so no one would notice how little of the revolution's promises were ever kept. Part 9. Hostages and War. In November 1979, students stormed the American embassy and took 52 diplomats hostage. Khomeini publicly backed it, calling it a second revolution. The hostages became a tool of internal politics. Now anyone who spoke of compromise with America was a traitor. America's rescue attempt, Operation Eagle Claw, collapsed in a desert sandstorm. 8 soldiers died. The hostages were freed after 444 days. But the relationship never recovered. To this day, Iran and the U.S. have no embassies in each other's countries. The sanctions Carter introduced were never lifted. They only grew. Then, in September 1980, Saddam Hussein invaded, hoping for a quick victory over a revolution-weakened Iran. Instead came 8 years of slaughter that looked more like World War I. Trenches, barbed wire, minefields. Iran threw waves of teenage volunteers at the front, handing them plastic keys to paradise and telling them death was not defeat but martyrdom. Saddam answered with chemical weapons, mustard gas, and nerve agents on Iranian trenches and Shia villages. The West knew. The photos, the reports, existed. But while Saddam fought the country calling America the Great Satan, many chose to look away. American intelligence even passed Baghdad satellite images of Iranian positions. Iran saw who stood behind Iraq, and it remembered. Part 10. The 3 Pillars. The war taught the regime 2 lessons that define everything after. First, the West will always be against us. So Iran needs its own weapons, its own missiles, drones, air defense, and eventually a nuclear program that makes such a strike impossible to repeat. Second, fight with someone else's hands, on someone else's soil. If the enemy is strong, bleed him around the edges without exposing yourself to a direct hit. From this came the 3 pillars of Iranian strategy: missiles, proxies, and the atom. Missiles to hold the enemy's bases and cities at gunpoint, proxies to wage war without declaring it, and the nuclear cycle as insurance, the point after which attacking Iran stops being rational. The first proxy was already born. In 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon and occupied the south, the Revolutionary Guard sent instructors into the Bekaa Valley, bringing not just weapons but ideology, the cult of martyrdom, the art of asymmetric war. Out of scattered Shia groups grew Hezbollah, the Party of God, officially a Lebanese resistance movement. In reality, Iran's first projection of power beyond its borders, planted right on Israel's frontier. By 1988, both Iran and Iraq were exhausted, the front line back where it started. 8 years, hundreds of thousands of lives, and nothing changed on the map. Khomeini called, accepting the ceasefire, drinking from the poisoned chalice. He died in 1989. His funeral drew millions. The crush was so violent his body fell from the coffin. But the system he built outlived him. The assembly of experts chose Ali Khamenei as the next Rahbar. Not a great theologian, but loyal to the system, trusted by the Guard, skilled at balancing the clans. Under him, Iran would build the nuclear program, expand the proxy network, and grow the missile arsenal. Everything that, 36 years later, led to the War of February 2026. Part 11. The bomb. Here's an irony almost no one knows. America gave Iran its nuclear program. In 1957, the Shah signed a deal under Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace, a research reactor, fuel, and hundreds of young Iranians sent to study nuclear physics in the West. When the revolution later expelled the foreign experts, Iran kept its own scientists, trained in the world's best labs. After the revolution, the program went underground. The key supplier became the network of Abdul Qadir Khan, the father of Pakistan's bomb, who ran an underground nuclear supermarket selling centrifuge blueprints to Iran, Libya, and North Korea. Quick science. Natural uranium is almost all useless. U-238. The bomb needs U-235, about 0.7% of the natural mix. Centrifuges spin uranium gas at enormous speed, slowly enriching it. 3 to 5% fuels a power plant. Around 90% is weapons grade. And here's the catch most people miss. The hardest work is getting from 0.7% up to 60%. From there to 90% is comparatively easy. That's why every step Iran takes up the enrichment scale triggers near panic in Washington and Tel Aviv. In 2002, exiles revealed 2 hidden sites Iran had never declared. If everything's peaceful, why hide it? From there came a cycle that repeated for years. Exposure, inspection, partial admission, negotiation, sanctions. Israel saw it differently than the diplomats. It had already bombed Iraq's reactor in 1981 and Syria's in 2007. But Iran's sites were scattered across a country the size of 3 large European states, some buried deep underground, like Fordow, built inside a mountain under 80 meters of rock. 2 things worth remembering. Israel itself is estimated to hold dozens to hundreds of nuclear warheads, has never confirmed it, and never signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, demanding a transparency it doesn't practice. And the Iranian threat became a permanent tool in Israeli politics, consolidating society, justifying budgets, shifting attention. When diplomacy stalled, the secret war began. In 2010, a joint U.S.-Israeli cyber weapon, Stuxnet, infiltrated the centrifuges at Natanz, secretly changing their spin until they tore themselves apart, while the operator's screens showed everything normal. The first cyber weapon in history used to physically destroy industrial infrastructure. Meanwhile, Iranian nuclear scientists were assassinated by magnetic bombs, and in one 2020 case, a remote-controlled robotic gun hidden in a pickup truck. It slowed the program. It didn't stop it. In 2015 came the deal, the JCPOA. Iran dismantled two-thirds of its centrifuges, shipped out almost all its enriched uranium, and accepted unprecedented inspections. In return, sanctions lifted. Before the deal, Iran was 2 to 3 months from enough material for a bomb. After, more than a year. It worked. Then in 2018, Trump tore it up and reimposed maximum pressure. Iran waited, hoping Europe would save the trade. When it didn't, Tehran started breaking the limits, enriching to 20%, then 60%, spinning new centrifuges, restricting inspectors. By the mid-2020s, Iran stood right at the nuclear threshold, enough highly enriched uranium for several warheads, the time to weapons grade down to weeks. But uranium isn't a bomb yet. The Western consensus? Iran doesn't have one. What it has is the material, the knowledge, the infrastructure, and the missiles. Part 12. The web and the choke points. Since the atom is insurance for a big war, Iran needed levers that work now. That's the proxies and the missiles. The Hezbollah model spread across the region. In Iraq after 2003, the Quds force, led by the legendary Qasem Soleimani, wove dozens of Shia militias into a network. In Syria's civil war, Iran backed Assad to keep its corridor to Lebanon open. By the mid-2010s, Iran had what's called the Shia Crescent, an unbroken arc of influence from its border through Iraq and Syria to the Mediterranean. And in Yemen, the Houthis gave Iran a lever pointed at one of the world's great oil arteries. Those two arteries are the real prize. The Strait of Hormuz, through which about 20% of all the world's oil passes, has Iran sitting on one of its banks. Missiles, fast boats, and coastal batteries can threaten it without a single aircraft. And the Bab el-Mandeb, the gateway to the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. Together, these two straits are a switch that can crash the global oil market. That switch is one of the most powerful levers Tehran holds. As for missiles, after the war with Iraq, Iran's air force was in ruins, cut off by sanctions. Modern jets were impossible. But missiles were cheap, you could build them yourself, hide them in tunnels, and launch them by the dozen to overload any air defense. From imported North Korean Scuds, Iran built its own industry, the Shahab, Ghadr, Sijil families, with ranges up to 2,000 kilometers, enough to cover all of Israel and every American base in the Gulf. Add cruise missiles and cheap Shahed attack drones, already battle-tested in Yemen, Iraq, and Ukraine. The logic is simple. Iran can't win an air war against Israel or the U.S., but it can make any strike against it unbearably expensive. A salvo of hundreds of missiles and drones against cities, bases, and oil terminals. The shadow war escalated for years. The climax came in January 2020, when an American drone killed Soleimani at Baghdad airport. Iran answered with a missile barrage, but deliberately avoided maximum casualties. Both sides showed what they were willing to do, while keeping the conflict short of striking each other's capitals. That ended in April 2024, when Israel hit Iran's consulate in Damascus. For the first time, Iran openly attacked Israel from its own soil. Hundreds of drones and missiles. It was largely intercepted, but it revealed two things. Iran would no longer hide behind proxies, and even successful defense burned through expensive interceptors at a frightening rate. Partial strikes didn't solve the problem. They just raised the stakes for the next round. Part 13, February 28, 2026. Then came the real war. At dawn on February 28th, the U.S. and Israel opened a textbook air campaign. First, cyber attacks blinded the air defense networks. Then, stealth F-35 struck the radars and command posts, opening corridors for the next waves. F-15 and F-16 followed with bunker-busting bombs on the nuclear sites, the guards' bases, the missile centers. Cruise missiles reached deep into Iran without entering the air defense envelope. It was in that wave of penetrating munitions that Ali Khamenei was killed. According to international reporting, a bunker buster struck the Supreme Leader's compound during a meeting with his top security chiefs, collapsing the structure. And here the cult of martyrdom, the idea I told you to hold on to, did its work. Inside Iran, Khamenei's death was framed not as defeat but as conscious sacrifice. He knew the danger. He could have fled. He stayed. For millions of Shia, This turned the war from political to sacred, not a clash of states, but a jihad demanding a response from every believer. On paper, much went right. Khomeini dead, military infrastructure badly damaged. But the reality was harsher. The regime didn't collapse. Collective leadership kicked in fast. The Guard switched to backup command posts. The underground centrifuge holes by available data survived. And the response came within hours. Dozens of ballistic missiles and hundreds of drones, from Iran toward Israel and from Allied positions in Iraq and Syria toward American bases in the Gulf. Even after losing its supreme leader, Iran could still fire coordinated salvos across the entire region. From that moment, the war became a collision of two logics. The U.S. and Israel bet on precision. Every strike expensive, but on target. Iran bet on mass and the asymmetry of cost. A single Shahed drone costs a few $1,000s. Intercepting it with a Patriot or David's sling costs tens or hundreds of times more. Every day, the Defender's interceptor stockpiles drained faster than Iran ran out of drones. The American shield revealed its dual nature. It was supposed to protect allies, but in practice it stitched them into the war and made them targets. Missiles hit Camp Arafian in Kuwait, set fire to Bahrain's largest refinery, struck a radar base in Jordan. Iran's logic: if the campaign comes from your territory, you pay for it too. And the Gulf monarchies are uniquely vulnerable. They import up to 90% of their food and get most of their fresh water from coastal desalination plants. Stationary, nearly defenseless against cheap drones. Iran doesn't need to hit aircraft carriers. A few desalination plants and port terminals could push whole cities toward humanitarian crisis. In Bahrain, where most of the population is Shia under a Sunni monarchy, Tehran is betting on internal pressure too. At sea, Iran shifted the war into the Straits. Tankers were hit in the Gulf. The Houthis revived attacks in the Red Sea. Iran didn't need to close the Straits, just to create the constant sense of threat, and the market did the rest. China gets about 40% of its imported oil through Hormuz, India around 60%, Japan up to 3/4. The moment the market doubts that flow, the barrel jumps, insurance rates climb, freight rises, and the war lands in Europe's and Asia's energy bills and grocery prices. For the U.S. and Israel, that's the trap. Even a successful military operation becomes strategically expensive if the enemy can shift his answer from the military plane to the economic one. And behind the scenes, Russia reportedly boosted intelligence support, while Chinese commercial satellite images of damaged American bases circulated openly. This was no longer just Iran versus the U.S. and Israel. It had folded into the wider contest of great powers. Part 14. The unanswerable question: could there be a ground invasion? Theoretically, yes. Practically, it looks like a nightmare. Iran is huge, mountainous, with a security corps ready for a war of attrition. Even a successful invasion gives no answer to the question: what then? Occupy the country, hunt the Guard province by province, find a new government? After Iraq and Afghanistan, neither American society nor any European coalition has the appetite. A ground war against Iran isn't just a military nightmare. It's political suicide. So the realistic path is grimmer and longer. Continued airstrikes, naval pressure, cyber attacks, sanctions, and economic exhaustion. The U.S. and Israel can land heavy blows. Iran can't win in the classical sense, but it can make the war unbearably expensive. Which is why the real question after February 2026 isn't who won. The real question is, what conclusion does this war push Iran toward? A new deal under overwhelming pressure? Or the conviction that after everything, after strikes on its leadership, its cities, its nuclear sites, the only reliable protection against a repeat is a full nuclear arsenal? And if Tehran reaches that conclusion, we're left with the most uncomfortable question of all. Did these strikes bring about the exact outcome they were meant to prevent? That's the pattern. A great power tries to crush a threat and builds a bigger one. You just watched it play out across a century in Iran. But Iran isn't the only place this happened. The same logic, the same blowback, the same enemies built by the hands that feared them, runs through some of the biggest legends and turning points of the modern world. And the next one I'm about to break down will genuinely change how you see the map. If you made it this far, you definitely got smarter. Hit subscribe, and let's keep going, because the story doesn't end here.